Hello and welcome back for another GiantSlayerTV Top 10 video. Today's video will be a countdown of the top champions for rank play in patch 12.5b. Meta is still reeling after all of the adjustments in the recent B patch. Due to those nerfs, it's hard to say what the best champions are, but after a few days of gameplay, there are a few standing above the rest. In particular, a lot of 3 costs have made a stamp on the meta, so a good portion of our top 10 will be those champions. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our GiantSlayerTV social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. Normally, we'd kick off our top 10 with a low-cost unit, but this time we're upping the ante as the number 10 champion on today's list is Ahri. First off, let's address why we're not doing our usual 1 cost for this spot on the list. Quite frankly, 1 costs are lackluster in the current meta. There are no standouts amongst them like we've seen in previous metas. Some are okay as item holders like Brand for AP or Ezreal for AD, but they don't really make a huge difference in the meta. Use them and then lose them. With that said, Ahri has taken this spot mainly because she's the most well-rounded AP carry, but due to all the nerfs in the B patch, we're not entirely sure how weak or strong she is yet. Players are still utilizing her effectively, but not consistently. A lot of this stems from the Ahri nerf, but mainly from all the Syndicate nerfs. Syndicate was the primary synergy Ahri used before the B patch, so with the trait being all around weaker, this should mean Ahri is as well. But as we mentioned, Ahri is still being played and more often than we would have thought considering the nerfs. That likely means she's still viable, probably because there's no consistent alternative. Malzahar can do well, but needs the right conditions, and while Victor is absolutely a beast in the late game, you do need to 2-star him. That leaves Ahri as one of the few options when it comes to playing AP. Overall, we recommend keeping an eye out for Ahri as she has the most potential to change as players figure out the meta. Up next is another champion we're unsure about as Talon comes in at number 9. Before the nerfs, Talon would have undoubtedly been ranked either number 1 or 2. Few other champions when 3-starred were wreaking as much havoc as Talon was. Then the nerfs happened and Talon's place in the meta became questionable. Just kidding, Talon is still good. We have to play it cautiously because they did nerf multiple aspects of the Talon reroll comp. Due to that, it's clear Talon is weaker than before, but by how much? The player high rolls their Talon board in a game, they can still win, so that means on average, instead of placing in the top 2, a Talon board is more likely to earn a top 4. Consistently top 4 is still great, so Talon gets to keep a spot in the top 10. Depending on how the meta develops, he may continue to rise up in value, but for now, number 9 seems to be a safe placement. It's good to have a familiar face in our top 10, and the number 8 spot goes to a fan favorite, Echo. Innovator has been nerfed countless times, and yet it remains playable in every meta. Oftentimes, it's thriving and ends up being one of the best compositions. That was the case for 12.5, and even after additional nerfs in the B patch, it's still doing well. But why are Innovators so darn consistent? Well, that answer is complicated and far too long for this video, but to simplify it as much as possible, there's one major reason. Echo. Echo bridges the gap between Innovators and many other synergies. This amazing 3 cost is playable with Scrap, Innovator, and Assassin, giving players plenty of options to utilize him effectively. In the current meta after the B patch, we're still seeing Echo be a huge influence, particularly because of Scrap and Innovator. Hopefully they never nerf Echo out of the meta because he does hold a lot of comps together. Continuing on to the number 7 champion, we have another 3 cost unit with Gnar. Turns out having 3 trait tags is pretty good. That's what defines Echo in the current meta as well as Gnar. Gnar was just beginning to have his potential explored, and then tragedy struck in the B-patch nerfs. Thankfully for Gnar, he has 3 synergies of varying viability to play around. Yordle is the least impactful of the 3, but having an early Gnar to econ with Yordles is always a decent option. What we care more about are Socialite and Striker. Socialite has found itself in a prime position within the meta as quite a few compositions utilize it effectively, most notably Aurelia carry. Gnar fits like a glove in those boards, especially as pairing with Aurelia, thanks to Striker. And honestly, Gnar's not too bad himself. His ability gives him health and he can throw a hefty rock. While rock throwing isn't exactly flashy, it is effective, especially if you're playing multiple strikers. All in all, Gnar seems to be a staple of the current meta, even though they did nerf his potential as a carry. Having a strong frontline is important for any meta, and despite nerfs, Morgana still manages to earn the number 6 spot on our list as a premier frontline champion. Morgana cares not for Syndicate nerfs or even nerfs to her own kit, nay, she continues on as if nothing happened. And for good reason, because as it turns out, being an Enchanter frontliner is quite useful in a meta where Enchanters are commonplace. Being able to stall the enemy board is incredibly useful, and few frontline champions do that better than Morgana. It is worth noting that Morgana's role is slightly different after the B patch, that role being a trait bot for Syndicate boards. Instead, Morgana is the champion you often see paired with Senna. Senna sits in the back, dishing out healing and damage while Morgana holds down the front. Those two champions can be used in a plethora of compositions, whether that's Socialite Aurelia, Ahri carry, or even flex boards like Innovators. Overall, Morgana has a few key things going in her favor. She's a 3-cost frontline enchanter with good self-defenses and CC. There's not many champions that can compare to those credentials, at least not in the front line. Smack dab in the middle of our list, we have Silco coming in at number 5. We're a bit hesitant to put Silco in our top 10 because the public opinion of him is not so great. We're not talking about Silco from Arcane, we're talking about Silco in TFT, as he did receive some harsh nerfs in recent times. That said, we can't find any other champion that is as valuable by themselves as Silco is, much like Yuumi was in Gizmos and Gadgets. Because Silco can be tossed into any board, it means he has a huge influence over the late game. Of course, it can be a risk to use Silco since sometimes he can int away your units, but on average, he's going to provide more value than anything. Again, this is quite similar to Yuumi, just instead of CC, Silco is providing buffs and other types of utility. Unfortunately, the negative opinion about Silco has lowered his overall play rate, and that may continue to lower his priority in the meta. For now, we rate him highly and recommend playing him if possible, but time will tell whether our faith in him is misplaced or not. After mentioning her a few times, we have finally arrived at the number 4 champion, Senna. Once again, this champion is another one of the many that were nerfed in the 12.5b patch. Somehow, like those other champions, Senna is still a key unit in the meta. This is for several reasons. Being a 3-cost unit means 2-starring her is not too difficult, especially in stages 3 and 4. Senna is also an AD-focused champion, which is unique for enchanters, so you can play her as a secondary carry if needed. 3, she heals, which makes her unique after the removal of both Taric and Janna. And finally, she has 2 really good splash traits as tags. Enchanters are commonplace amongst many compositions, particularly with Senna and Morgana being used together quite often. Socialite also has more of a prominent role in the meta thanks to champions like Aurelia and the fact that you can easily splash in both Gnar and Senna. In general, Senna is possibly the most well-rounded 3-cost champion you can use in your comp. The only downside is that yes, she was nerfed, so playing Senna carry is probably not all that viable anymore. Our second and final 5-cost champion on today's list comes in at number 3, Jinx. We've been a bit harsh on Jinx in the past, saying that she wasn't particularly good and that there was rarely any reason to use her. But since the mid-set came out, Jinx has had a real glow-up. The main reason is because Twin Shot is much more flexible as a synergy, both the trait itself and the champions. That means you can have opening boards like Lucian Corki or Mercenary Gangplank before transitioning smoothly into Jinx carry. Jinx has also received a plethora of buffs over the course of set 6 to the point now where she's a legitimate carry. We're still not convinced about her long-term viability, but at least in the 12.5b meta, Jinx is viable. A far more common carry in the meta after the B patch is Aurelia, who comes in at number 2. What is it with the champions that received nerfs somehow bouncing back and doing even better than before? Aurelia is another one of those champions as 5 less attack damage did nothing but seemingly help Aurelia. This can be explained for a number of reasons. By far the easiest explanation is that by nerfing so many aspects of the meta, a champion like Aurelia can truly shine. There's less threats to her, and with Striker being buffed, she can dish out plenty of damage without the fear of being bursted down. On top of that, Socialite, Innovator, and Scrap are all doing well currently, and all 3 of those synergies are great for Aurelia. It's also worth noting that beefy frontlines aren't as common, meaning Aurelia is less likely to get stuck on one target. Being a reset champion, you want Aurelia to go from one target to another, and there's plenty of squishy boards that enable that for her. Plus, in the compositions where Aurelia does really well, she has great backup damage dealers like Sivir, Senna, Orianna, Seraphine, and Jace. Basically, the meta has come together to collectively boost Aurelia as a carry, and that's definitely working well. And finally, our number 1 champion for today's list is Orianna. Even though the joy has left TFT, Orianna is quietly trudging on by herself in the mid-set. We've highlighted her before this, but it's clear that with no major standouts in the 12.5b patch, a flexible utility champion like Orianna is more than worthy of the number 1 spot. As we've mentioned, Innovator is still somehow a composition despite the nerfs, and Clockwork plays a role in helping facilitate that. Guess who's a Clockwork? Orianna. Remember how we've mentioned enchanters multiple times? Yep, Orianna is also an enchanter. With 2 flexible splash traits and an ability that provides both survivability and CC, Orianna is a no-brainer for being one of the best champions in the current meta. Flexible champions like Orianna thrive in post-nerf metas, but with that said, it does mean that as the meta becomes more defined, her priority may slowly fall off. That's it for our top 10 champions of patch 12.5b. But before we go, we of course have a few honorable mentions to talk about. Our first honorable mention is Malzahar. Malzahar may not be a consistent AP carry, but there are definitely times where he outshines every other AP champion in the game, specifically when the mutant mutation is good for him, such as Synaptic Web. With Synaptic Web and blue buff, Malzahar transforms into a completely different champion. Beyond that, Malzahar is a great supporting unit for AP board since he spreads damage nicely and lowers the target's magic resistance. Overall, he may be lacking in a lot of ways, but Malzahar is still a worthwhile consideration for any AP board. We'd be remiss to not mention the two frontline units that are still doing well, those being Leona and Braum. Bodyguards haven't gone anywhere in the meta, but both Debonair and Syndicate nerfs did lower the value of Leona and Braum. That has opened the door for other frontline champions to take their place. But by no means are either of these champions unplayable, there's just more options besides them in the meta. So keep playing both Leona and Braum if possible, but be willing to try out other frontlines as well. Alright folks, that's all we have for you for today. V-Patch has so far had a positive impact on the overall meta by toning down some of the outlier champions like Talon. That said, we've got plenty of time before the next patch, which does mean that the meta is going to continue to change. Due to that, expect to see a follow-up top 10 to this one in a few weeks to see where the meta ends up. Let us know in the comments section below which champions you're having the most success with and ranked after the V-Patch. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to like button and subscribe. Future Giant Slayer TFT videos.